progressive overload and how to boost your language learning progress. So I'm not going to waste your time. A lot of beginners start off making decent progress in their language and then they basically proceed to drop off and get nowhere. So by the end of this video, you'll understand how to implement progressive overload into your language learning to keep ramping up your progress. And yeah, it'll be useful. So if you're new to the channel, guys, definitely hit the subscribe button. But yeah, with that said, let's go. So what is progressive overload? Progressive overload is gradually increasing the intensity of something over time so as to increase progress. And a few examples of this are in the gym. So progressive overload is actually a gym term, which basically means you increase the weight and the number of exercises over time, or you do it slower, etc. You just make the exercise more difficult, and over time you get stronger, because obviously if you start off, you're not going to be able to lift 100 kilos above your head, but you can't just keep lifting like little 1 kilo weights if you're going to get really, really strong. You have to kind of progress over time. And that kind of idea, I would say, also applies to language learning. So if we're language learning, for example, we obviously can't start off with very, very difficult content. We start off with easy content, but we can't just stay on that if we want to make progress. Obviously, you can still look at it for enjoyment, but you need to actually consume more and more difficult things to get better. So to progressive overload in language learning, we'd be doing something like consuming more difficult content, studying more, etc. And that means you basically get better at your language. So the too long didn't listen is you need to basically up the difficulty over time of what you're learning, otherwise you won't get anywhere. And I'm going to explain how to do that, because most beginners actually learn a bit and then they get stuck. So here's what we're going to do. Adding progress overload. I don't know what I've written here, sorry. But to use this superpower, basically, we first need to understand where we are. So as I said before, you can't just start by lifting 100 kilos above your head. So the content you consume needs to be at a level called comprehensible input. And if you heard this term before, you're probably nodding your head. If not, I'll explain it, don't worry. So comprehensible input is basically content that is understandable but not completely familiar. So orange here on this diagram would be the current level of language proficiency. So anything in English, basically, you could read it in your foreign language and you'd understand literally basically every single word. You'd understand what it was about. The purple is too challenging, so you would understand almost no words and you wouldn't even be able to get a gist of what it's talking about. The blue is comprehensible input, and that's in the middle. So it's basically content that is, you don't understand enough words to kind of get the gist of it, but there's a lot of words you don't understand and a fair bit of it is unfamiliar. So this is the kind of level we constantly want to be consuming at. So whether we're reading books, listening to podcasts, watching TV, etc., having them in the comprehensible input section is good, because when it's too challenging, it does kind of crush your motivation, and when you can't even get a gist of what's going on, it almost makes it harder, because you kind of knowing what's the context is really useful. And when it's too easy, you don't make progress because you already understand everything. So constantly keeping the difficulty one level above what you can read and listen to comfortably will fuel optimal growth. So of course, something that's in the comprehensible input section now might not be in the comprehensible input section in 2 months, because you get better, and what was comprehensible input before becomes current level of language proficiency, if that makes sense, because you've become better, so it's easier. So you would constantly need to be pushing the comprehensible input zone up, hence the term progressive overload, because you're constantly making the content you're consuming harder. So a few examples of this would be, say with reading, if your current level of like comfort would be reading beginner practice paragraphs, that starts to get easy. You can understand every word. You would have to overload that, and that might mean moving to intermediate practice paragraphs, or maybe even short stories for beginners. If you're listening and your current level of proficiency is audiobooks, they're not that challenging, so that's a bit more advanced than normal, like a complete beginner. And you can follow them extensively. They're not really that difficult. Overloading might mean moving to more challenging audiobooks, if you can find that, or TV shows where people are talking. It's not like a narrator talking, it's just people talking to each other. That might be a bit more difficult. That kind of thing. Basically, if it's too easy, you're consuming extensively, which means you're not paying attention to every single word. You're just listening like you would listen to me. And you can understand all of the words and understand what's going on. If it's too hard, you can't get the gist by just listening, and you can't even understand most of the words if you have to look at a transcript. So if it's too hard, make it easier. If it's too easy, make it harder, until it's just right and you can get a rough kind of gist of what's going on extensively. So just listening to all the words, and you can understand like 20 to 60% of the words. And yeah, that's basically it, guys. If you do have any questions, comment down below. But a lack of progressive overload is kind of the easiest way to douse the flames of growth, and it's really, really important to constantly be moving that kind of needle up towards harder and harder content without going too difficult. So yeah, hit the subscribe button, I can't speak today apparently. Hit the subscribe button, guys, and comment down below. I've got my links to my website and my Discord as well, and have a good one.